Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Explorations in Savitri, with our beloved Alok. We are in the book of the Divine Mother still, Canto 3, the House of the Spirit and the New Creation, page 327, beginning about 10 lines down. There, mind, a splendid sun of vision's rays, shaped substance by the glory of its thoughts, and moved amidst the grandeur of its dreams. Imagination's great ensorcelling rod summoned the unknown and gave to it a home. Outspread luxuriantly in golden air, truth's iris-colored wings of fantasy, or sang to the intuitive heart of joy, wonder's dream notes that bring the real close. Its power that makes the unknowable near and true. In the temple of the ideal shrined the One. It peopled thought and mind and happy sense, filled with bright aspects of the might of God and living persons of the One Supreme. The speech that voices the ineffable, the ray revealing unseen presences, the virgin forms through which the formless shines, the word that ushers divine experience, and the ideas that crowd the infinite. There was no gulf between the thought and fact. Ever they replied like bird to calling bird. The will obeyed the thought, the act, the will.
So we see here not only a marvelous description, if you may use the word, of supramental world,
Yes.
with the supramental beings of native to that world.
Yes.
Unlike what has to be done here, we also experience the difficulty and the big gulf between this world and the world out there. And that shows the measure of the difficulty. I mean, it's not as simple as, okay, now we have read and people often discuss, debate, but look at the challenge. From the very beginning, he starts. Before we touch this first line, actually, we see that in Sri Aurobindo's hierarchy of worlds, when he describes the order of the worlds, so the lower three worlds come from the higher worlds. That's how it is. They are a shadow. That's why they can be transformed. So matter comes from pure existence. So the piece of pure existence, its stability, it's the last bedrock, changes into inertia. Then life comes from consciousness force, chittapas. And mind comes from supermind. And the soul itself is a drop in this net of time and space, but coming from bliss. So that is why soul, by its nature, loves the divine, seeks for bliss and beatitude. It is instinctively inbuilt within it. So he describes that in great detail in the Life Divine. So mind regains its fullness in the supramental. So that's what he speaks of, King Dumatsena regaining his sight is essentially the divine mind fallen here blind, once again regaining its sight. And the consequences of that fullness of light he is describing to us. So
He regains it only through Savitri.
yes, it has to come by grace, and it has to go through that passage where Satyavan must die.
Yes.
That is the bigger part, difficult part. Their mind is splendid sun of vision's rays. So the mind regains its fullness. No more the rays, but the sun itself. Shaped substance by the glory of its thoughts. So what it thought, the substance automatically obeyed. Now this is one of the biggest challenge. In fact, the biggest challenge. Here, matter does not obey the thought. Leave aside the spiritual force and the supramental. The moment the supermind tries to put little pressure over it, it breaks because its mold is not of that make. And that's why the mother says all imperfection that we find on earth is ultimately, if you go back into its roots, it's because of the imperfection of matter. There's a very beautiful small write up of the mother in volume 2, very early, Words of Long Ago. She says all imperfection is ultimately the imperfection of matter. We may blame people or whatever, but ultimately the material mold is such that the forces of the divine which enter into it cannot act freely. Not because they cannot act freely in an absolute sense, they can, but matter will break down. So it has to be slowly prepared. It has to be made plastic to the spirit's touch. That explains many things. For example, when there is a physical illness and we call, why doesn't it heal automatically? So some people ignorantly draw a conclusion that, well, if mother's force is there, it's powerful, omnipotent, why am I not getting well? It's not about you. But if the pressure is put of that absolute force, body will just vanish.
Break us.
And this happened with even the classical example is of that, Gangadharan ji recounts. I think he was his previous master, Swami Ramalingam. Anybody has heard his story? He used to talk about grace light and his body undergoing changes, and how the bone is. He talks about transformation, and there is a passage in the agenda where mother was asked about it. That he talks about grace light as an isolated phenomena. This is just round the corner when Sri Aurobindo is coming. And he also foresaw in a way, in a certain sense, the coming of Sri Aurobindo, somebody who will complete. But look what happened. He was trying. Then a point came when he told his disciples, now I am no more going to guide you. Regarding your guidance, someone else will come.
Mm-hmm.
And he shut the doors and said that, don't open the door. When you open the door, after some time, I would be gone. So 2 months passed, and the government agencies and everybody, they were all getting restless, and they opened the door and he was gone. This is one of the authentic things people have actually witnessed. He was gone. So the whole thing vanished, because beyond a point the body cannot contain. Now that's not what Sri Aurobindo wants. So he wants transformed beings here.
But here the mind is shaping substance by
Yes,
the glory of its
thoughts.
thoughts.
Here we think, but it turns out to be most of the time wishful thinking. Even if you recover thought in its fullness, still the body doesn't respond. That's why we have to work at both the ends. People don't understand the great importance of physical education in the ashram. You can't. If you are a lazy bone, forget about transformation. You may have all the knowledge all here, but substance is not responding. And moved amidst the grandeur of its dreams, imagination's great ensorcelling rod summoned the unknown and gave to it a home. So here we again draw a differentiation between imagination and reality. And people often joke that, the tree of realization, sometimes, it looks like the imagination tree. So one person was saying, I don't know whether it's an imagination or a realization that I am having. But in truth, there is something called as truth imagination. Now, what is truth imagination? It gives true forms to things which have not yet got a body. Just as we create forms by imagination. What is imagination but a fragment of the power of Maya, with which the divine builds form. Same thing. So we can say that all creation is an imagination of the divine. But because it's an imagination of the divine, there is a truth creation. Then it goes down and down. There are many mediators and who keep distorting, adding their little brick here and their little plan there, and the whole thing becomes on this world. But the first forms and the first creations in the world are truth creations. Then they come down and material world is completely different. So that's the power of imagination itself becomes truth imagination there. So he's using it in such an ensorcelling rod. Outspread luxuriantly in a golden air. Truth's iris-colored wings of fantasy, or sang to the intuitive heart of joy, wonders, dream notes that bring the real close. So there, all is beauty and bliss, and every form is many shaped tones and hues and colors and everything. What here when we have fantasy forms here, it's more and more distorted. Actually, it's very interesting. You must have seen Eric von Gogh's painting, the famous man who later on turned schizophrenic. So if you actually see his paintings, you will actually see how there is a distortion coming. He in his heydays, and then toward the end, this used to be taught to us as a classic example of how a schizophrenic mind works. And I have seen here also one lady's paintings when she was deeply inspired, and the paintings were so close to something real. But later on, when she underwent a breakdown, psychotic breakdown, then one can see the forms that were there, human forms. The eyes had become like glass, which was very different in her previous paintings. The eyes were like you felt they are really real, something like a soul depth. So all these, even fantasy, we call it fantasy here and create a distinction between real, unreal, fantasy, dream. But there, those distinctions don't exist because what the spirit conceives, it creates. At that level, if you see, spirit is conceiving out of the freedom. So you can call it's imagining, it's fantasizing. Yes, of course. But these fantasies are close to the real. It's power that makes the unknowable near and true. So that which is beyond, which is unknowable, it gives to it a certain kind of form and brings it near and true. In the temple of the ideal, shrined the one. It peopled thought and mind and happy sense, filled with bright aspects of the might of God and living persons of the One Supreme. So not only objects, but even beings, personalities, they are being created and they are revealing the truth of their being. Mother speaks of it passingly in the experience of 3rd February 1958, where she speaks about the great supramental ship, where there are beings who are going and how they are, they are being judged. She says not by any moral or outer things, but the psychological condition. And the only way was that it's like a scanner.
The
color. And she sees her own body and she describes how it's absolutely white on top, radiant white, and the legs are completely orangish, which is because touch of earth. It's a transformed body she describes. She doesn't use the word, but it's complete. Whereas in others, there are some shadows cast, there are blotches here and there, and they are being sent back. So that is
some are ready to leave.
Yes, some are ready to even go to the other side.
Yes.
And she says, some were ready. And she describes that more or less some people, she says, I was not surprised, and some surprises in way. It means all our human judgments are meaningless. Who is ready, who is not ready, who is fit, who is unfit. So she sees and says some were from ashram, some from outside. All our measures. So this is a different world altogether. Each person is a living person of the One Supreme. The speech that voices the ineffable, the ray revealing unseen presences. In that light we can see these great beings hidden from our sight. The virgin forms through which the formless shines. So the virgin forms is also the first forms, the first gods. Virgin forms are also those which are not corrupted by the fall. So the lower hemisphere and the touch of division, they are not corrupted by that. So these are the virgin forms which are there in the supramental world. The word that ushers divine experience and the ideas that crowd the infinite. So again, the word that ushers divine experience is the way we can describe Sri Aurobindo's words. It is not just something which is intellectual. It can usher the divine experience because it's vibrating with the supramental touch. Of course, there is nothing like a supramental language on earth. Mother says the difficulty of expressing it upon earth. But it is the word that can usher the experience. There are people who have this experience reading Sri Aurobindo's books, that they have the experience of what they are reading. I had myself in the beginning reading Synthesis of Yoga, used to have this. I read a chapter and I have that experience. So it is something which can usher, it can bring you the experience, not an intellectual understanding. That comes later.
I interviewed a fellow from Oroville yesterday who was there in the very early years. And he said to me, all of us knew we were going to be supramentalized. he said, it was there, we knew it was there. And of course it never happened, but that feeling was there when Mother was there. That everything is possible, everything can happen.
Fortunately, we didn't see that transition in this life.
That's right.
So, for someone like me,
That's right.
the other day someone called me up and said, how can it be possible? You have never seen the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, but when you are speaking, it looks like constantly they are there. I said, yes, because we have grown up with that. We never had that distinction. Once Hutadi told us, meeting me and some others, so she said, when Mother was there, so we had to tell her, Hutadi, please, for us there is no was, there is only is. But I can understand the people who saw the transition, they had a big difficulty, suddenly the physical support is withdrawn. But some took the leap of faith and knew that now you have to discover her inside. And Mother had already spoken that. The reason why I am withdrawing, because before that she withdrew from ashram activities from 62 onwards, she never came down. So she said that I hope that my children have grown enough, progressed enough to be able to contact me within. Very clearly she says. That was the purpose. So the whole, at some point that is required. The word that ushers divine experience and the ideas that crowd the infinite. So the ideas which were coming, it like multiple rays of the sun, they are being released into creation. And these ideas are crowding the infinite radiance of the supramental consciousness and being. Now, another very interesting thing, there was no gulf between the thought and fact. That is why the closer we draw towards the intuitive realms, this scholarly mind, analytical mind, that tends to go into the background, and then it becomes just a mediating agency, not an agency to discover truth. Because truth is self-evident. But this mind can be used, just like Sri Aurobindo uses in the synthesis and the life divine. It's so logical. But did he arrive at these things by logic? No. It was self-evident. Yes. But if that mind is developed and surrendered, it will be used by the greater truth.
Yes.
So that's what, there was no gulf between the thought and fact. Ever they replied like bird to calling bird. The will obeyed the thought, the act, the will. So that is another attribute of supermind that both Mother and Sri Aurobindo at different places describe in Life Divine at great length, that here there is a dissonance between thought and will. And every human being who is even little sincere knows it. That, all the good intentions, that's why some of the Mother's writings where she says, a drop of practice is better than an ocean of theories, resolutions and good advices. Because here there is a gulf between knowledge and will. Knowledge and power. But there, omniscience is one with omnipotence and omnipotence is one with omniscience. What the spirit sees, it creates. Here, the mind sees. Then it says, okay, now I have to practice it. So it tries. Then it tries to practice. Then in action it fails. It takes a long time because there is they are all scattered. But there it's one. There was a harmony woven twixt soul and soul, a marriage with eternity, divinized time. So the whole play of time, and this is what we have to enter into, that right now it's unhappy, the march through time, because it is not our movements, our steps are not in sync with the law of truth. So when they are in sync with it, there is joy and freedom and the great disclosure. Their life pursued, unwearied of her sport, joy in her heart and laughter on her lips. The bright adventure of God's game of chance. What a wonderful line. Life pursued with joy. So, this adventure word comes as if there is something unknown. Now, is it possible in supermind that something can be unknown? Sri Aurobindo says that it can, for the sake of the joy, put behind itself the knowledge. How else there will be adventure? Adventure means there is a seeming play of chances, something is unknown. In fact, avatars do it always because otherwise it will be a sham. So they have to put it all knowledge in the background. It can be accessed any time. That is how Sri Aurobindo says that it's a divine manifestation. So it is there, but it is not brought out freely into the play because otherwise there will be no play, no nothing. Human beings will say, you knew everything. You have no issues. So he weighs. So like that, the same way. And the mother says this in one of her conversations. She says, people, there are those who have the attitude of me as the supreme mother. And there are others who treat me as a guru. So they sometimes wonder when sometimes I have to ask or I say I don't know. Even Sri Aurobindo, I remember when reading evening talks at places where Sri Aurobindo says, I don't know. So I wonder how Sri Aurobindo can say, I don't know. Champaklalji was, when Sri Aurobindo told him, asked him questions, who all are there in that, the village where he's coming from. There was a little ashram. So who all are there and who is... Then at one point Champaklalji says, you know everything. So Sri Aurobindo under his breath says, yes, I know everything. But you have to veil it. Because then otherwise you are not a divine example.
I once wrote to Nolini and told him all the things that were happening in New York City. And he said, Mother was very happy to hear that. She was wondering about what was going on there.
Even this was asked to Sri Aurobindo, that then what is the need to check, like the radio, second. He said we have to reconfirm it because at the material plane things change.
Yes.
So you have to reconfirm whether the things that have been given or transmitted, how accurately the world is reproducing it. Several places when Sri Aurobindo is asked, so mother is omniscient, she knows everything. She says,
Lloyd George,
including what, with this touch of humor, including what Lloyd George had for his breakfast. Then he says, you are mistaking this knowledge as a knowledge of encyclopedia. What you had for breakfast, what you have. Now this knowledge is an essential knowledge. There is a whole passage in volume 3 where she speaks of knowledge of the scientist and the yogi. So yogi's knowledge is accurate and perfect. But for example, a yogi will see a person and say that, well, he is wonderful and sincere and growing. But the outer being may not reflect any of this. So somebody who sees the outer will say, no, your knowledge is defective. Now yogi has seen the essence and therefore he is right. But the details of working out, when mother was asked, he can know. But he may not care to know that. Because he has seen the truth.
Ramanujan
Yes, Ramanujan
had worked out these things that only 60, 70 years later we're finding out that they were all true.
So this is how, a bright adventure of God's game of chance.
Sri Aurobindo's humor.
Yeah. In her ingenious ardor of caprice, in her transfiguring mirth, she mapped on time a fascinating puzzle of events, lured at each turn by new vicissitudes to self-discovery that could never cease. So, this is the whole trick, when divine comes in the earthly play, and even in that high realm, because there is a joy of unexpectedness. People don't realize it. People don't know that if everything is known, life would be so boring. No adventure. Probably most people will say, what is the point of, doing anything? But the unexpectedness of the play brings its own delight, which we won't have otherwise. So, the famous story in Ramayana where Rama is tied, or people speak about Christ being crucified. So they say that some people say, it proves they were not divine. On the contrary, it proves they are divine.
Absolutely.
It's a deliberate veiling of the whole thing so that they can go through the earthly play. How else would Christ set such a high standard of compassion? How else would Rama set such a high standard of nobility and chivalry? If he knew I am going to hit an arrow and Ravana is going to die, people will say this doesn't inspire us. I want that arrow. But now people say I want to be like you. Otherwise they would want that arrow which is shot. So this is how he's describing that world. And it's a self-discovery. So every moment through all these puzzle of events, though it is known, yet you have to go through as if not knowing. So the puzzle of events which are ultimately leading toward the march of time. Now this is our big problem because we don't understand this puzzle, what it means. But at a divine level, it is all seen and arranged in this way. At that level, there is nothing like what is fate? It's a series of chain of seeing will, which has arranged everything, all the circumstances. So you are actually playing a game which has been fixed. But then we will actually not be able to play in such a way that we reach that point faster. So therefore, that foresight is not given and will not be given till we arrive at that point. Because then we don't need any more. We have crossed that barrier of ignorance. So it's.
But look at, for a moment, the divinely inspired words: chance, caprice,
Yes.
mirth, puzzle, vicissitudes.
Yes.
He puts it all in 5 lines.
All together. And these are the things which we experience. But there it is mirth.
Yes.
For the sake of game.
Yes.
Okay, let's play the game. Game of games, of chance. But you know everything. Okay, I'll put everything behind. I'll veil it for a moment. Let's play. But here there is a deliberate veiling. Unlike we in ignorance, there is a veil, thick veil as such. Ever she framed stark bonds for the will to break. So, it summarizes the whole thing. Brought new creations for the thought's surprise and passionate ventures for the heart to dare, where truth recurred with an unexpected face, or else repeated old familiar joy like the return of a delightful rhyme. So that is where the supramind is poised between the one and the many. So it draws from the one and gives it. It knows. It's not that it doesn't know. And Sri Aurobindo speaks of the 3 layers of the supermind, whereas the highest, the imperative supermind, not only knows, but it is absolutely the same. But as we come down, there is the apprehending supermind, the representating supermind, which picks up these real ideas and puts them into representative images. See, it's a great detail he describes it, but here it's so beautiful and poetic. At hide and seek on a mother wisdom's breast, an artist teeming with her world idea, she never could exhaust its numberless thoughts and vast adventure into thinking shapes in trial and lure of a new living's dreams. And this changes perspective. So people in India at some point very afraid of rebirth. But if you look at it, rebirth from another point of view, well, each time we get a new way, new chance, new approach towards the same truth in countless ways. And I take it in a little different way that, okay, if 1,000 years for the supermind, that means 1,000 years we will have the joy of service. What is the problem?
Absolutely.
Is service of the divine something trivial? When supermind is established, there is no joy of service. The joy of service See, the bhaktas, it is said, Sri Ramakrishna himself used to do it. And the mother speaks of that. That, if you are one with the divine, there is no more joy of love. You are one. So the bhaktas deliberately put a subtle veil. Why? Because they want to enjoy the relation. That's why when mother said Hanuman and Rama are not two different, they are one. But look at the joy that is created by the one becoming Hanuman. Or Nandi and Shiva, they are one. But for the joy of the play, there is a subtle difference. So, so many ways of approaching.
I love when Sri Aurobindo writes, a veil behind the heart,
And
a
a
lid over the mind. Love and devotion rend the veil, and in the silence of the mind, the lid thins and vanishes.
so beautiful. And so she could never exhaust this adventure of living dreams and trial and lure of a new living's dreams, untired of sameness and untired of change. See, this is how divine looks at it. When mother was asked, Mother, who am I? Now, there are so many answers people give. Mother gave, and mother herself has given different answers. But one of her answers is very, very fascinating. It is one of her experiences also, which she recounts in prayers. She gives the answer, Mother, who am I? She answers, the divine under many disguises. Look at it. Who am I? The divine under many disguises. Mother, are you God? It is true of all of us. Each one of us are potentially God. Only we do not know it. Look at it. Changes the perspective.
Yes.
It's not like some cruel hand of destiny is, punishing her, convicted. No. We are all in our depth divine. This is the beauty of, original Vedantic thought is this. Only some know it, some don't know it. Those who don't know it suffer. Those who know it are delighted in the game. Whatever it brings, even the most challenging circumstances, well, I have chosen this, the great adventure of consciousness and joy. Endlessly, she unrolled her moving act, a mystery drama of divine delight, a living poem of world ecstasy, a kekimono of significant forms, a coiled perspective of developing scenes. Look at this line, coiled perspective. You see, this reminded me of this kekemono and coiled perspective.
Yes.
See, of cinema. So what happens in cinema? All the things have been shot, and they are in a reel, coiled, compressed. So somebody would ask, what is there now? Of course, there are more digital things, but I don't know whether now.
When we had the reels.
Reels.
Speaking of the reels.
So what is the reel? It's a whole life story. If somebody would ask, what is in it? Oh, the Mahabharata. Mahabharata means 100 years of all the. Yes, it is there.
A coiled perspective.
Coiled perspective. Now what is happening? It is completely there in that box. Now it will unfold itself. Everything is decided. The unexpectedness, the abandonment, the banishment into forest, the dangers, the difficulty, the victory, the gory war, everything. But it's already there. Coiled perspective. Time. Compressed and coiled. It's actually a very scientific, supreme science. A brilliant chase of self-revealing shapes. An ardent hunt of soul looking for soul. A seeking and a finding as of gods. So this is the original game which everybody played of hide and seek. And you know that my friend is hiding round the corner. He's not gone forever. So there is a joy in finding and not being able to find for quite some time. You don't get this idea that, oh, he's gone forever. So there is a hide and seek. So its origin is the gods play it. They assume a different form. Okay, search me, and then you find it. Okay, you're hiding there, and there is a joy of discovery. See, friends used to play this game, and there was such a joy when you found the person hiding there. But now, of course, as we grow up, we get all these mental ideas and gone, and all these things come into play. That vision is missing. There, matter is the spirit's firm density, an artistry of glad outwardness of self, just like vapor condenses into ice. So, same way, matter is the spirit's form density. Again, we see the supramental science, how it works. So, there is no antagonism, except that this dense material there is obeying the will. But here it becomes so dense that because why it becomes so dense? Because of the inconscient coming up and covering it. That's the whole play. A treasure house of lasting images where sense can build a world of pure delight. Senses are meant for delight.
Yes.
But here they bring so much report, so much pain, suffering, and all kind joy, thrills, fear. But sense is in its origin. There is a whole chapter in Synthesis on the supramental sense. And Sri Aurobindo describes this in one of his poems, The Divine Sense. He says, surely now I am no more taking an earthly fruit because all my taste buds have been transmuted. So whatever I take, it is delight. The fruits of ecstasy, heavenly paradise, those fruits. Similarly, whatever one hears when senses are transmuted, it changes into delight. Now we are in like and dislike zone. So, like and dislike zone means certain things we don't like, certain sounds we don't like, certain sights we don't like, certain smells we don't like. But in that zone, everything is delight. It changes into delight automatically because this distorting veil is gone. This was asked to Mother that certain smells which we don't like, in that zone it automatically changes. It's not that you lose discrimination, it is there, but as it enters, it changes into delight when there is a supramental sense. So it will solve so many problems. All the perfume industry will go out of job. The home of a perpetual happiness, it laws the hours as in a pleasant inn. So he's speaking of home and the inn. So all the time one was dwelling in a state of inner joy. But as the hours are going in different ways, this joy is coming. Joy of meeting a friend, joy of moving away, joy of playing a game. So like pleasant inn, the happy hours, the movement through time. The senses there were outlets of the soul. Even the youngest child thought of the mind incarnated some touch of highest things. So Dilip Kumar Roy asked once Sri Aurobindo that regarding the senses, he says that I think I should, just like the sannyasis crush the senses. He says this is no part of a yoga. Mastery, yes. Change, yes. Sublimation, purification, but it's no part of our yoga to crush the senses like the sannyasis do, to dry up the senses. Because if you do that, then they are no more ready for the transmutation. You have to refine them. So even he gives this process, like for instance, the senses seek pleasure. Refine the pleasure. Upgrade it, sublimate it, till one day everything becomes a joy. Their substance was a resonant harp of self, a net for the constant lightnings of the spirit, a magnet power of love's intensity, whose yearning throb and adoration's cry drew God's approaches close, sweet, wonderful. So this substance was not a veil, but a harp. So like a music, many notes in one music, melody. So that is how this substance was resonating with the touch of the divine. And in different ways it was felt as sweet, close, wonderful. Its solidity was a mass of heavenly make. So this also it's very interesting. When Sri Aurobindo was asked about supermind, he says it's very difficult to explain it, but the supermind is plastic like gas and solid like diamond. He says both things at the same time.
Mind can't handle.
Yeah. Though we are very interestingly trying to reach that substance. Yes, because like new substance are coming into, and very interesting, they are made of something which is close to diamond, like graphene. Solid, strong, it's very strong, but very resilient and plastic material, very light. So it will be the future substance for aircrafts and other. In aircraft, you want that. You want something very solid, spacecraft, but you also want it to be light. So actually, very interestingly, space travel itself. Now, this is of course outwardly, but ultimately a substance which is solid at the same time very light. So this is the supramental substance. Its fixity and sweet permanence of charm made a bright pedestal for felicity. Its body is woven by a divine sense. Now, how are bodies woven? Woven. This is what is the Upanishadic way of understanding creation. It's not like forms are made and then we behold them. It is our beholding that builds the forms. Actually, it's very interesting because our senses limit. Out of infinite, let's say, vibrations, it selects. And it selects this much light, this much, literally as on the computer, the brightness and everything. And eventually, because we do it habitually, we don't realize it. And it's only that in certain disordered conditions of the brain that this problem comes. That, oh, senses were weaving reality. See how people who take LSD, I mean, it's not a good thing, but there's a book by Aldous Huxley, Doors of Perception, Heaven and Hell. Right. So at a certain point of time, people started experimenting. Why? Because it made them escape from the trap of material world, which is woven by the senses in a certain way. So when you take these drugs, suddenly you experience light as sound.
And they open doors.
They open doors of perception which are not possible.
Yes.
So they actually describe it. That, well, I can't say, but light was singing. And it's actual, real experience. So people often say these are hallucinations, but it reorganizes the senses. Actually, senses weave reality, but it's habitual. Every day, because the human caste is like that. But another kind of senses will organize reality in a very different way. Well, animals, they experience reality through infrared images, which are very different from the way we human beings experience. So the supramental reality is very different. And Sri Aurobindo was asked, and he said that I see Manilal, at the same time we see Brahman, he sees the past, he sees the future, he sees everything around. It's a different vision altogether. So all the senses there work in unison. Here the brain integrates them. It receives from different places. There are different centers of the brain where they are processed ultra fast, and then we have an image. But actually, it is not the real thing. The real thing we never know because the brain is not developed to organize all this material. So it's a workable, working thing. Yes. So its body is woven by a divine sense, prolong the nearness of souls clasped with soul. Its warm play of external sight and touch reflected the glow and thrill of the heart's joy. Minds climbing brilliant thoughts, the spirit's bliss, life's rapture, kept forever its flame and cry. Here the senses find and they lose. So when one sense lose, you try to compensate with another sense. Somebody whom you loved, you cannot see, so you want to talk through the other sense. Or you hear the voice. Or sometimes people say, oh, this perfume, he liked it very much. So you reconnect with that reality in this way. But that was not needed here. But that is in the original supramental world. But that is how it will be when matter completely becomes plastic to the supramental substance. So this is what Sri Aurobindo is working towards. All that now passes lived immortal there. So there was no disappearance. Right now things pass away because the senses are limited. In the proud beauty and fine harmony of matter, plastic to spiritual light. And it is moving in that direction, even modern science. So people who, talk about doomsday and hopeless, they actually are not looking at so many things that are happening. So there is a whole experiment which is going on, and with fair amount of success, that maybe with light we can open up the blocked arteries. You don't need those catheters. Already people have discovered with sound you can do it. But these are extremely expensive and we don't yet have the tools. But in principle it is there that light can actually smoothen the flow through the arteries and remove the blocks. But that intensity of light, the arteries cannot bear. That is the problem. But surely once we know the principle, we'll find a way to figure it out. But look at it, that matter is plastic to spiritual light. This matter is not. This is the difficulty. Otherwise, LASIK surgery is that. It's a recognition. Laser surgery, that by light you can actually cut, penetrate, and do what is to be done. You are compelling matter by these means to become plastic, because it's not just a question of one surgery. It's suddenly in matter's world of matter. There is a change. Probably beings of that matter are discussing, oh, there is a new possibility. It's opening doors, because once you achieve it in one human being, in a few human beings, in a certain way, it will tend to spread. So this is what is in the ways of the divine. Its ordered hours proclaim the eternal law. So the entire unfolding was the law of truth. Vision reposed on a safety of deathless forms. Time was eternity's transparent robe. An architect hewing out self's living rock. Phenomenon built realities. Summer house on the beaches of the sea of infinity. The first forms are emerging, what they would be on the beaches of the sea of infinity. So this is a wonderful place to go, the beach of the sea of infinity, and witness the emergence of these forms, and then come back and let it happen here.
Thank you, Allah.